148 pages covering 2 years of the intense and controversial investigation of the U.S. president. Now the Mueller report is finally public. It seems as though no day in Washington is normal anymore, but today will likely go down as one of the wildest of the Trump presidency. The Mueller report was finally made available to the world. Here are some of the key findings. Robert Mueller looked at 10 episodes for possible obstruction of justice, but he could not conclusively determine that Trump had committed criminal obstruction. However, his investigation identified numerous links between individuals with ties to the Russian government and individuals associated with the Trump campaign. But according to the report, the evidence was not sufficient to support criminal charges. Now, the reaction to Mueller's report has been pouring in all day. Stephen D'Souza joined us now live from Washington. So, Stephen, this report was expected to cause shockwaves in the U.S. How's it being received tonight?
Well, Mike, with so many things here right now in this political climate, it really depends on your political persuasion. If you're a Democrat, they're looking at this as a possible roadmap towards impeachment. But Republicans, on the other hand, see this report as totally exonerating President Trump.
No collusion. There was no collusion. No collusion.
On Twitter and at the White House, Donald Trump sounded a victorious note.
This should never happen to another president again. This hoax.
But according to the 448-page report, Trump was anything but happy in May 2017 when he first heard of the special counsel's investigation. According to an aide, Trump said, "Oh my God, this is terrible. This is the end of my presidency. I'm effed." The report lists 10 times Trump tried to influence and interfere with the investigation, including asking his lawyer Don McGahn to fire Robert Mueller. The report concludes Trump's attempts often failed because persons who surrounded the president declined to carry out orders or accede to his requests. Before the report was even made public, Attorney General William Barr praised the White House for cooperating with Mueller's team and repeated his conclusion about 2016 Russian election interference.
We now know that the Russian operatives who perpetrated these schemes did not have the cooperation of President Trump or the Trump campaign.
But the report says there were numerous links between Trump's campaign and the Russians, just not enough evidence to lay criminal charges. It also said Trump refused to sit down for an interview, and his written answers were inadequate.
All right, I see him.
Democrats, meanwhile, called out the differences between Barr's summary of the report and the actual contents.
Even in its incomplete form, however, the Mueller report outlines disturbing evidence that President Trump engaged in obstruction of justice and other misconduct. Contrary to the Attorney General's statement this morning,
on obstruction of justice, the report doesn't exonerate Trump, nor does it recommend charges. It does suggest, though, that it's up to Congress to pass judgment. Now, one way for Congress to pass judgment, they say, is to get more information. They say they still have critical questions, and the person to answer those questions, they say, especially the Democrats, is Robert Mueller, a man who's loomed large over this story, but we've yet to hear from publicly. And so, Mike, Democrats have asked Robert Mueller to testify before Congress next month.
That'll be another big day there. Now, Stephen, despite all the redactions in this, there was a lot of new information in the report. Can we expect to be hearing a lot more about it in the days ahead?
That's right. It's interesting. A lot of the new information sort of filled in the blanks and really gave us a fully rounded picture of events that we already knew of or had already been described publicly. It also gave us an insight into the thinking of the Mueller team as it relates to issues of collusion, as well as why they didn't charge the president with obstruction of justice. It also gave us a sense of the complicated and nuanced nature of what they were studying. For example, we will call that Trump Tower meeting in June 2016, where the Russians offered Donald Trump Jr. some dirt. Well, the report talks about how the president told his subordinates to withhold emails from the public and even changed a public statement to remove any reference to dirt being offered as a result of that meeting. But the special counsel found that while Trump tried to affect the public perception of that meeting, he still allowed documents relating to that meeting be handed over to investigators. So it really shows you just how complicated an issue this was.
Certainly. Now, we're also hearing from Republicans and people close to the president. How are they reacting?
Well, Republicans are declaring victory, saying that this is essentially over, that the president has been exonerated. They want to turn the investigation towards the Democrats, investigate the investigators, and they're saying this provides them plenty of fodder for Trump's re-election campaign. Take a listen to what Kellyanne Conway had to say.
He doesn't need a point-by-point rebuttal. You know what his greatest rebuttal will be? His greatest rebuttal will be he's in office, he's going to remain in office, and he'll get reelected because the Democrats have nothing.
Stephen, is there any talk tonight from Democrats of trying to impeach the president?
Well, it's interesting. Nancy Pelosi had said previously that, it would take really some groundbreaking new information for them to consider impeachment. And it really seems that the jury is still out on impeachment. Some Democrats are saying, they still need to do some more investigation, hear from Robert Mueller, ask more questions of William Barr, and that it's still not soon enough to say whether impeachment is necessary, because while some of the behavior talked about in the report doesn't rise to the level of criminality, it still could be politically damaging. You still have to deal with the political reality, though, that there aren't enough Republicans on side in the Senate for a president to be impeached. And so with an election coming up next year, perhaps that's a point where Democrats speak their mind on how they feel about the president. So impeachment may not be the road they end up taking.
Okay, Steve, good speaking to you again. Steve D'Souza reporting live for us tonight in Washington. Now, one more note from the Mueller report, and it has to do with comments White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders made to the media regarding why Trump fired then FBI Director James Comey. Sanders said the White House had heard from, quote, countless FBI agents who had lost confidence in Comey. Turns out that's not true. In the Mueller report, investigators wrote Sanders told them those comments were, quote, not founded on anything. And you can read the full 400-plus pages of the Mueller report for yourself. We have it online for you at cbc.ca/Toronto. Closer to home, if Premier Doug Ford allows corner stores to sell beer, Ontario taxpayers could be on the hook for hundreds of millions of dollars in compensation. CBC Toronto was first to crack this story open. Our Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley has the details.
Beer rolling here, guys.
Since he's become Premier, and before that, Doug Ford has made several promises about beer, including this one.
We're going to further expand sales of beer and wine into more grocery stores, into corner stores, and into big box stores.
But there's a big hitch in the way of Ford's promise becoming a reality. A binding contract between the province, the beer store, and the big brewers. Signed 4 years ago by the Wynne government, the contract puts a strict limit on the number of stores that can start selling beer in this province right through until 2025.
I don't really know what's involved at this moment in breaking that contract, but I do know that it could be very, very expensive.
Allowing Ontario's 9,000 convenience stores to sell beer would breach the contract, and the province would have to compensate the beer store and the brewers. Beer industry sources tell CBC News that the compensation would run into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Is that too steep a price for taxpayers to swallow? We asked the finance minister.
Well, I think the Premier was pretty clear during the election and since that we want to put beer and wine in corner stores, big box stores, and more grocery stores because we want to offer people more choice and more convenience.
What do the people say?
If it's something that's coming out of our tax money, then I wouldn't necessarily agree with that.
I think that money could probably go elsewhere.
If it's going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars in order to make it more convenient, I don't know if I support that.
The beer store is posturing with this $100 million figure, trying to scare consumers away from something that they want.
The government is trying to renegotiate the contract with the beer store right now. The company declined a request for an interview. In a statement, the beer store says it is in talks with the province about reaching a mutually agreeable amendment to the deal, but they're refusing to discuss the details. Same goes for Vic Fideli.
We're going to continue to consult right across the industry over the course of the summer.
And I know the Ford government has a history of ripping up contracts, but I think it's inappropriate to expose Ontario to that kind of financial and legal risk.
In last week's budget, the Ford government repeated its promise to allow corner stores to sell beer. The budget makes no mention of the potential cost to the province of doing so. Mike Crawley, CBC News, Toronto.
The chair of the Toronto Board of Health is warning tonight Toronto Public Health could lose $1 billion of funding over the next 10 years. The slash is part of the province's plan to consolidate local public health units across Ontario. Chair Joe Cressy says after the announcement on Thursday, the board realized it had an immediate $86 million hole in its latest budget. And after crunching the numbers, it found the cuts will be much larger and affect TPH for much longer than this year. Cressy says the funding cut would affect various programs, including infectious disease initiatives, immunization programs, and sexual health promotion.
There is indisputable research that shows that when you cut funding to immunization programs or communicable diseases programs, that more people will get sick and more people will end up in hospitals. That's just a fact.
Cressy says Toronto Public Health programs fully funded by the province are going to be hit by a 50% cut. Other programs funded roughly 75% by the province will also drop to a 50-50 split. The province says it is working directly with municipalities to slowly shift to the new funding model over the next 3 years. Now, Health Minister Christine Elliott also said in a statement to CBC that Cressy was, quote, misrepresenting the facts in an effort to, quote, fearmonger and sow confusion. Colette Kennedy joins us now with your first look at the forecast. Now, after some gorgeous weather out there today, we've got a couple days of rain ahead of us.
Yeah, we sure do. Wouldn't it be nice if we could just extend this into the holiday weekend? It never seems to go that way, does it? I thought we'd have a look at kind of the headlines of what you can expect as we head through the next 3 days. Some of you maybe have 4. So we do have evening rain and thunderstorms. There's already lots of rain out there, even if it's not hitting you where you're at. Some thunder possible as well. And then Friday, rain and showers even into Saturday. Because of that, we do have some warnings in place. I'll show you. But some of the good news, we've got to get into that too. Sunday, we will see some sunshine returning to the area. So that will be nice for part of this weekend anyway. I want to show you the daytime temperatures, how they progress today, starting from 6 degrees at 6 a.m. this morning. By lunchtime, add 10 degrees to that. Toronto up to 16 and then 22 degrees. Very pleasant. As I said, we'd get a nice dry slot, or hopefully we would as the system moves through, and it's even longer than anticipated. So that's good if you were able to take advantage of it. Areas that you're seeing here in green into a rainfall warning. We're talking about heavy rainfall when you add it all together. So what's happening now into Friday and even some of those showers into Saturday. So many areas, especially up into this area over towards Peterborough, back into Cottage Country, maybe over 60 millimeters. It's a special weather statement for the GTA and for the city, and into southwestern Ontario will probably be more in that 30 to 40, maybe 45 millimeters worth of rain. This is what I mean by we're surrounded. So it is coming in. It's definitely on its way. Some heavy rains through the overnight tonight, and then even through the day tomorrow, we'll be looking at that rain lingering. I'm going to take you into Saturday and into Sunday. We'll have a closer look also at the rainfall accumulations and get more specific into certain areas. But overnight tonight, hey, a mild overnight, 8 degrees, and then 10 degrees tomorrow afternoon, much cooler than today.
Certainly was. Okay, thanks, Colette.
You're welcome.
Well, every day after class, game time is over. At some schools, basketball hoops are being taken down once the students are let out. The board says it's to stop theft and damages, but this Raptors employee wants to change that.
I think that everyone needs a place to play, and at the end of the day, education goes beyond the 9 to 3, and we need to have places for kids to play.
More on his drive to let the kids play coming up at 6:30. And Toronto is in the deep end tonight over a shortage of swimming instructors. Parents are complaining about canceled classes, and now City Council is calling on Parks and Rec staff to find a fix. City Hall reporter Lauren Pelly set out to find out why the shortage is happening and what can be done about it.
He is a bit of a nervous swimmer, so it was really important to us, as I was on mat leave, to get him into as many swim lessons as we could over this year.
So that's exactly what this Toronto mom tried to do by registering her son Malcolm for city classes last fall. A month later, the class at this Corso Italia pool was canceled because of an instructor shortage.
December rolls around and it's time for the winter term, and once again, get up super early, refresh forever, get in. Oh, they still have the Monday at 5. Well, surely they've gotten an instructor by now.
Instead, the class was canceled again.
I just kept saying, how could you do this again? How could you knew you didn't have an instructor for the fall term. How could you still not have one for the winter term and still have it online?
City swimming lessons are held in community pools across Toronto, and families throughout the city told us they've experienced canceled classes, often thanks to a shortage of instructors.
in the past couple of weeks, we've been receiving a lot of phone calls from parents.
This counselor wants Parks and Rec to take a closer look at the concerns.
And then they're told, like the last minute or even the minute they get into the center, oh, the program has been canceled, which is frustrating because these parents have, registered way in advance.
Council unanimously backed her call to find a fix, and now city staff are set to report back next month on their recruitment efforts. But why is there an instructor shortage in the first place?
So it's very difficult for high school students and university students, especially because of the high demand for school and doing well in exams.
The Life Saving Society believes stagnant city wages could also be to blame.
Of course, the minimum wage is catching up to what their wages were before, so there's kind of less of an incentive to take the awards, which demand a high level of responsibility, especially when they have to do lesson plans and they have to mark the students and they have to do report cards. It's very demanding.
If you don't get in...
Whatever the cause, this mom just wants a fix before the summer swimming season.
I just want to know that they are looking into it. It sounds like the system is flawed.
Lauren Pelly, CBC News, Toronto.
Well, people in North Etobicoke are calling on the city to open up one of its biggest parks. Roundtree Mills has been partially closed for more than a decade. The restrictions were originally made due to concerns about safety issues. As Nick Boisvert tells us, some in the community say the space is being wasted.
Roundtree Mills Park is big, quiet, and for the last few years, mostly empty.
I've spent my youth coming here and enjoying barbecues and festivals in the park.
Ellie Houdon's been coming here since she was a kid. Now she throws parties for her own children here. It isn't always easy.
We're standing in one of the biggest parking lots in the park, and there's no access to parking in this park.
And it's been like this for 11 years now. Back in 2008, neighbors started complaining about late-night crime in the park, so the city started blocking off certain areas.
The city says it's going to open up this road starting in the spring season, but even when it does, people are only going to have access to certain restricted parking areas.
When the gates open, there will be no access to these two parking lots, which are closest to the picnic areas, fields, and washrooms. People can only park here near the entrance on Islington, leaving them with a near 1 kilometer walk into the park.
There were activities that, in fact, drove many park users away. So that's something that we're looking at. But I would like to see the park, have a more open feel to it.
Ali Mohammed says the concerns about crime are overblown, and they don't justify blocking access to Toronto's 5th largest park.
There's no reason to have it blocked off. It's because it's been done so long ago. People have kind of given up hope.
What do you envision this place could be?
Oh, I see birthday parties, I see kids playing, I see programming, activities, movies in the park, movie nights in the park.
The city says it does open up the lots for special occasions, but there's no indication that a permanent change is coming. Nick Boisvert, CBC News, Toronto.
He came back and showed me the camera, a picture of a sponge that was left inside of me.
So this man is now suing his doctor, but it is time-consuming, costly, and could be fruitless. A CBC News investigation went back decades to find out how often patients win when they sue. What we found out after the break.
The weather update is brought to you by Train Extreme Conditions Testing. It's hard to stop a train, really hard. Train, the most reliable heating and cooling brand.
The Ford government says it is working to end hallway medicine in the province, and it's pointing to the opening of a newly renovated mental health emergency services unit here in Toronto as proof.
This new unit is a perfect example of the types of health infrastructure projects that will help build capacity, provide specialized supports, and help end hallway healthcare in Ontario.
Health Minister Christine Elliott on hand today at St. Joseph's Health Centre. She says the mental health unit there has been renovated and expanded, changes costing more than $4 million. The government says it plans to create 3,000 new hospital beds in Ontario in an effort to end overcrowding. Well, hundreds of medical malpractice lawsuits are launched every year in this country, 800 last year alone. But a CBC News investigation examined data that goes back decades and found the rate of patients winning in court is shrinking. Habiba Noshin explains why money may be a factor.
Jim Wiseman is still dealing with the fallout from his surgery 2.5 years ago. He was in the hospital to have his bladder removed to treat his cancer. Only days after the surgery, he was having unusual pains. A doctor ordered x-rays that revealed the problem.
He came back and showed me the camera, a picture of a sponge that was left inside of me.
That meant another operation to remove the sponge. He spent nearly a month in the hospital.
I was in real bad shape. I went through hell in that hospital. I mean, total hell. I've never been the same since.
He says he's still in constant pain and discomfort and can't even wear his regular clothes.
I live in track pants. I can't even walk around the block anymore.
Wiseman is suing his doctor for the mistake, but he's discovered how time-consuming and difficult that can be. CBC News obtained data going back decades that show how often Canadian doctors are sued and how often patients win. We analyzed annual reports from the Canadian Medical Protective Association, the group that provides legal defense for doctors. Over the past 40 years, the number of doctors has increased, but the rate of patients suing has dropped. And for the cases that do make their way to court, the number of patients winning has shrunk.
Fewer and fewer people are opting to sue doctors.
Medical malpractice lawyer Paul Hart, who represents patients, says most people just don't have the resources to match the CMPA.
Most lawyers, medical malpractice lawyers, would not really look at a case that's worth less than $250,000.
If the care was reasonable.
The CMPA has far deeper pockets. They recently reported assets worth $4.5 billion. It says it only fights suits where it believes it has a strong case for the doctor.
So the Canadian Medical Protective Association is not going to advance an unethical defense. We will only defend the defensible.
Doctors pay an annual fee to the CMPA and then are reimbursed for much of that by the provincial governments. We wanted to find out just how much. What the numbers tell us is that in a recent 4-year period, provincial and territorial governments paid out at least $1.8 billion to the doctors for this fee. Patients we spoke to said that they feel it's their tax dollars being used against them to provide the legal fund to defend doctors in lawsuits.
These are all the pages from the hospital from...
Jim Wiseman's suit has dragged on for 2.5 years. He says he worries the CMPA is using its resources to wait him out. Do you think this will resolve in your lifetime?
I'm hoping it will. I'm sure they're probably thinking maybe I'll drop dead and they won't have to worry anymore.
For now, he spends much of his time here, frustrated by what he can no longer do, and by a fight that's dragged on far longer than he expected. Habiba Noshin, CBC News, Toronto.
I'm Adrian Chung outside of Earl Grey Senior Public School, where the students who play basketball here are hitting nothing but air. I'll explain coming up.
An online petition is attracting a lot of attention, getting hundreds of signatures, and it's all to do with the basketball hoop. The petition says schools across the city are taking down not just their basketball nets, but entire basketball hoops after school, leaving no place for kids to play. Adrian Chung joins us now live from Earl Hague. Now, Adrian, you met with the man behind the petition.
That's right, and he's a former student here, and he says that is what saddens him the most, seeing an empty backboard, no basketball hoop, no net. And really, they've been taken down, as they are every day, by the school after 3 p.m. And this petition starter says that it's really the younger kids that are missing out, especially when they don't get a chance to play. On the court, Luke Galati lets his game speak for itself.
Having something so simple as a circle and some net around it can honestly change your life.
He says it's also where he found his voice and some lifelong friends. What does this ball mean to you? What does that rim mean to you? Just playing out on these courts.
Honestly, it's everything. I walk down the street, so many of my friends, people I know, people in my community, it's through playing this game and through that net.
He worries that won't happen for the next generation. At his old high school, Earl Grey Senior Public School, the school regularly takes down the nets after 3 p.m., meaning no one can play here after school or on weekends.
And that's something that I want to change because I think that everyone needs a place to play, and at the end of the day, education goes beyond the 9 to 3.
Galati's started a petition to get the TDSB to change its policy.
As you can see, there are 2 nets over there that don't have rims on them right now.
Already, it's received hundreds of signatures. Others weighed in, like this tweet to CBC Toronto. He says his elementary school used to take down basketball nets too, and he eventually lost interest playing the game. The Toronto District School Board says removing the hoops is not a board-wide decision. It leaves it up to each school, especially when the hoops have been vandalized or stolen before.
At the end of the day, it's not about putting people against each other, but it's about working together. So I want to work together with the Toronto District School Board because I just want to make sure that that next generation is able to be blessed with the game that's given me so much.
So we got a chance to play a little bit of basketball. Luke was definitely a much better player than I was. I bricked most of those shots, Mike. But Luke ultimately says that his real goal here is to create some widespread change with the TDSB so that there is a widespread plan to get some of those nets back up after school hours. Mike, I'll send it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Adrian. Live at Earl Grey Senior Public tonight. Well, great day call out to get outside and play a game of pickup if you can find a net and a hoop. This long weekend, though, might be a bit trickier.
Yeah, we sure like our hoops in this town, and it might be a little bit trickier. More indoor activities may be in order, and I'm going to walk you through why. We do have quite a bit of rain coming through. Even if you're in an area that's not yet being affected by it, it is on its way. But look at this current temperature in Toronto, 22 degrees. It's 20 in Hamilton. St. Catharines, 22 now. It was 25 a little bit earlier. But because of the rain, and when you put it all together, so what we'll see tonight into Friday and even some showers Saturday, when you put that all together, it's going to add up to significant amounts. It's not as much of a problem around the GTA, but when you go further north and we get into some of the cooler areas where the ground is still frozen, that's where it becomes an issue in terms of seeing some flash flooding. Now, into the city of Toronto, we know that if we get some heavy downpours or even a few embedded thunderstorms, it can always be a little bit of an issue with some flooding. So the rainfall warnings are in green, special weather statement going elsewhere, including the city and the GTA, where it's going to be more in that 30-40 millimeter range, but up into the green, 60 millimeters or more in some cases. I'll break that down further. We'll show you the rainfall accumulations. This is a radar, though. This is the active current radar in terms of that last image is where the rain is now. So you can see it just pushing in on our doorstep here. In many cases, you're already feeling it to the west and to the north. I want to show you very quickly what's happening, though, that this goes all the way, trails down towards the Gulf. So there are 2 systems. It's pulling in all of this moisture laden, and that's why it's going to be an event that kind of comes and keeps on coming in waves. So we'll go in, watch out, hold on to your seatbelts here. We'll go in for a quick closer look and show you how it rolls through. So into the overnight hours, we're still looking at some heavy rains, especially just to the north, but at times that'll vacillate in towards the city and towards the lakeshore. Friday, Afternoon, still some heavier rains, pockets of it. Late Friday, we get into some breaks. It's not the end of it. I showed you where all that moisture, that source is, so more coming in with the next system. Saturday, at times it looks like it will be more showers, but there'll be at least one band midday of some heavier stuff going through, and then getting into some decent conditions later in the day Saturday, and the setup for Sunday not looking too bad. Still a bit of instability, but I'm hoping for much better things for us into Sunday. A look just towards Friday noon, what we're talking about in terms of some of the rainfall totals. But then once we get into Friday night, look how they increase. And as we go towards Saturday morning, up in towards Peterborough, Barrie, over maybe 50 millimeters. These only saying 48. I think this model is going too high with Toronto, by the way. But that chance we're going to see some significant rain at least. Overnight tonight, hey, mild overnight lows. That's one positive thing I can say. And the other thing, just know it's going to be colder and breezier tomorrow with that rain coming in. But look towards the end of this holiday weekend. The bunnies hopping up and down for a reason. Some sunshine and some milder temperatures coming back, Mike.
Okay, thanks a lot, Colette.
You're welcome.
The province's court challenge of Ottawa's new carbon tax wrapped up today after 4 days of rare televised hearings, both sides making their final arguments.
Greenhouse Gas Pollution Pricing Act is one of the ways Parliament is addressing the greatest challenge of our time. It is a constitutional exercise of Parliament's peace, order, and good government power to address a matter of national concern.
What the Act seeks to govern, what a federal matter would seek to govern and could govern, are local matters.
Ontario is challenging the so-called carbon tax, arguing Ottawa is overstepping its authority. But the lawyer for the federal government says the threat posed by climate change is urgent and of national concern. The matter is now in the hands of 5 appeal court justices. It'll likely take them several months to reach a decision. A family in Stouffville could face jail time for animal cruelty charges. Last year, the OSPCA charged David and Victoria Small, along with their 32-year-old son, Jason, after more than a dozen horses were found neglected and 13 more dead. They pled guilty to allowing an animal to be in distress, which carries a possible jail term of up to 2 years. Today, the court heard emotional impact statements from the local horse community. Greg Ross was there.
David, anything you want to say after that? Victoria, Jason?
The Smalls left the courtroom without saying a word, not long after hearing a lengthy community impact statement. It included emotional testimonials from members of the local horse community who helped save 14 horses and a pony last year. They were found malnourished and emaciated on a property that was being rented by the Smalls.
It was awful. Brought back the memories. Been there, lived it, didn't want to hear it. So it was tough.
The Smalls were not charged in the deaths of 13 other horses that were also found on the property. Many of them had been buried in a mass grave.
There was 10 pulled out of that field, right. 2 in the back, 1 in the trailer, 1 in the manure pit.
Michael Chung owns the property. He discovered the malnourished horses. They had been chewing on the fence boards to try and stay alive.
You had to pretty much go throughout the property and change the fence boards.
Yeah, we had to change. We didn't have to change the posts, but all the boards we had to change, like majority of them.
All of this information was also included in the impact statement. Even lawyers for the Smalls had to admit it didn't sound good.
The thing's sad all around, and I think a lot of the fault to the Smalls is they're not incredibly the most sophisticated people, and they're not going to get Order of Canada anytime soon. But
this lawyer that represents Victoria and Jason Small is asking for a $5,000 fine and a lifetime ban from owning any livestock. The lawyer for David Small is asking for the same, but has also suggested a 2-year probation period for her client.
Are the Smalls remorseful about any of this?
Absolutely. Absolutely they are. And Mr. Smalls at least expressed that to me.
The prosecution is asking that all 3 of the Smalls receive a 90-day jail sentence, 2 years probation, and a lifetime ban from owning any livestock. The judge has scheduled another court appearance for June 25th, where she will deliver her sentence. Greg Ross, CBC News, Newmarket.
Ontario could be adopting a new way to protect endangered species, looking at allowing municipalities and developers to pay a fee instead of taking certain actions to protect species at risk.
With selected species, the approach that we're going to take is an ability for people who have an application under the Act to, in some cases, be able to say, yes, we will pay a certain amount of money because, again, that Conservation Trust group, independent conservationists and experts, have said that this is a better strategy and approach to preserving that species.
The PCs are proposing to create a species at risk conservation trust to oversee these fees and put the money towards other protection measures. Now, other changes include allowing the Environment Minister to suspend the species and habitat protections that are put in place once an animal is listed as endangered or threatened. Right now, those protections can last up to 3 years. Critics aren't happy with the change. According to the David Suzuki Foundation, the primary cause of wildlife decline in Ontario is habitat loss and degradation, which it says limits need to be set, not greater efficiencies created. The foundation released a statement in part saying, "We need to ensure that the province upholds a piece of legislation intended to change business as usual activities that drive wildlife decline, not pave the way for them." Well, in France, this was a day to thank the hundreds of firefighters who battled to save Notre Dame Cathedral. Meanwhile, the investigation continues into what caused Monday's fire. Renee Filippone has the details from Paris.
It's been 3 days since the fire, and today was about honoring the individuals who worked hours to put it out, saving a good portion of the cathedral, which was just minutes away from total destruction. 400 firefighters were part of the effort, and this morning President Emmanuel Macron invited some of them to the Élysée Palace to honor their efforts. 270 showed up, and they're not only being credited with their bravery, but their ability to successfully save countless relics and pieces of artwork. 90% were saved, and the emergency plan that was in place, including a human chain to remove the priceless pieces from the cathedral, are being credited. Forensic experts have finally been cleared to enter Notre Dame and begin the more detailed investigation into what sparked the fire. There were concerns earlier about the stability of the building, and work is ongoing to make it safe. To date, 40 people have been interviewed, many of them involved in the restoration work that was happening at the cathedral. And it could be anything that set the fire, an electrical problem, a cigarette. The speculation here continues. But officials maintain that it does not appear to be criminal. Renee Filippone, CBC News, Paris.
While we are getting clues as to how the Notre Dame fire started, more than 100 years later, it's still not known exactly how the Great Toronto Fire was sparked. We do know when. This week in 1904. Throwback Toronto is coming up after the break, and that's not the only way we're going back in time. I'm on Gerrard Street, just east of Coxwell. If I was to step into a time machine and go back to 1895, I'd be standing on the first 18-hole golf course in all of Canada. Coming up after the break, we'll take a look at the forgotten history of golf courses in Toronto. The Great Toronto Fire began this week in 1904. It started at a building on Wellington near Bay. Hundreds of firefighters responded. It burned for 9 hours, destroying 100 structures along Bay between Wellington and the Esplanade. Now, despite the devastation, no lives were lost. And this week in 1999, a TTC workers' strike shut down the city's subways, streetcars, and buses.
Staying home, watch soap opera.
For those who couldn't stay home, it was a slow, crowded commute with an extra 500,000 cars driving into the city.
I'm going to an interview and I can't find parking anymore.
And something you probably haven't seen in a while, open hitchhiking on Toronto's downtown streets. Thankfully, the strike would last just 2 days. Well, what do Toronto streetcars and the game of golf have in common? According to a new book, it was the game of golf that was one factor in the growth of Toronto's original network of streetcar tracks almost 150 years ago. I spoke with one of the co-authors of Toronto, the Lost Golf Courses, about just how different areas like Gerrard between Coxwell and Woodbine looked back in the late 1800s. So we're right along Gerrard here.
Yeah.
Take me back in a time machine, 124 years. What was this area like?
Well, we were smack dab in the middle of a golf course. You would be standing on the first 18-hole golf course in Canada. The Toronto Golf Club had bought additional land the previous fall and created an 18-hole golf course on this very site.
How many golf courses do you cover in your book?
In this first era of golf, there were over 30 properties that were used as golf courses in that time frame. Many of them ultimately closed down because they became subdivisions, or they moved further out of the city as things densified here and new transportation systems allowed you to go further afield.
But until that point, you were riding the tram with your cart, with your clubs?
Absolutely.
For the people that live in the East End right now, how much of the things they take for granted, the Queen car, the Gerrard car, how much of that can trace back to the golf courses that were once here?
So Lamont Smith, aside from founding the Toronto Golf Club and the Granite Club, also founded the Toronto Street Railway that came out to the East End. That whole idea of having a commute to downtown Toronto as it relates to East Enders really began in 1876.
So we're at Golfview Avenue. One of the literal signs are in the neighborhood that this was once a large golf course.
Absolutely. In fact, not one golf course, but two. On the north side of Gerrard was the Toronto Golf Club. On the south side of Gerrard here at Golfview was a course called the Old Rye Field, where a lot of the caddies and kids would play.
As a historian, what can you look around to see and realize this is once a golf course?
Well, yeah, I mentioned gravel pits. I think if you look at most public parks in Toronto, you know, they were called sand lots for a reason. They tended to be mined out gravel pits. If we look at this property, before it was turned into a subdivision in 1911, they actually mined it of its gravel. This property was sold as a 94-acre subdivision, and over the next few years, lots were sold and homes put up. And here we are today.
What can you learn about one city by looking at what happened to its golf courses?
Well, it's the same pattern repeating again and again, which is golf courses actually start as failed subdivisions. People are expecting this wonderful community to sprout up, and an economic downturn happens, and it doesn't happen as quickly as they had thought. And so they rent their property to some enterprising golfers for a few years. Then, of course, things improve, the city gets larger, and it's time to say, no, we're not going to lease you the property for another year, and so you have to find new ground to play on. That's when a subdivision shows up, and we have to do it all again. We're seeing it again at Glen Abbey. We saw it last year with York Downs. There's great pressure to sell these courses at a very high price, and while I understand that, I would say, regardless of whether we keep these current properties as golf courses, I would hope we keep them as green spaces. Our city continues to grow by leaps and bounds, and we're not making any more green space. So whether it's golf or something else, I would say let's try and keep what green space we still have.
Our elders are passing away, and we want to preserve their way of life.
Preserving indigenous culture with coffee. From Peru to the Arctic, how two indigenous communities worlds away teamed up to make a special cup of joe. We'll explain after the break. When deciding on your next caffeine fix, you might think of the coffee's origin. Maybe you prefer a South African coffee or South American or African. Well, what about an Arctic blend? The next story is about a new brew that supports two indigenous communities, one in Peru, where the beans come from, the other in Nunavut, where it's branded and sold. Ali Chiasson has the story.
It's delicious. Kapitiak is good coffee, and this is what I have, good coffee.
Having a cup of kapitiak brings a whole new meaning to connecting over coffee. It's made with beans harvested by indigenous farmers in Peru and sold in the Canadian Arctic at Inuit-owned and operated cafes.
Isn't that a great adventure for us, eh?
I know, it's so exciting.
We're in Barrie, where the beans are roasted.
Do you want to describe the process for us?
Because these are your beans.
Yes,
right.
Those ones are my beans. The altitude is high up in the mountains. In order to get our beans, we have to go use donkeys or horses. Then we sun dry for 5 days.
Wow.
It has kind of hits of chocolate as well, so it's amazing flavor.
Ersi recently moved to Barrie and saw an opportunity to bring that hometown aroma with her and sell it here in Canada. At the same time, Pam was looking to fund her local heritage society in Nunavut.
We've been having good reviews at home already, yeah. So.
After a grant from the government to get the business started, the Cambridge Bay elders were soon toasting to roasting.
They were just so happy, and they couldn't stop saying, kapitiak, mamakjo, good tasting coffee.
And so the name was solidified.
Yes.
Brilliant.
75% of the proceeds go to funding cultural programs in northern Indigenous communities, all the while creating jobs in Ersi's hometown. Despite being in two different hemispheres, they have a lot in common.
We have all lived in a traditional lifestyle, and then most recently were colonized and are working to revitalize and maintain who we are as Indigenous peoples.
The different roasts are called igloo, kayak, inukuk.
Our elders are passing away, and we want to preserve their way of life, and the only way we can do that is through programming.
This impact in the families in my town and the opportunity that they have, it is great. And thank you for you guys. And you know, we are involved in this together, so it's a huge project for all of us.
Ali Chiasson, CBC News, Barrie.
Honestly, everything is good here. But what I eat mostly myself, I eat sea bass, sea bream, red snapper.
Well, tomorrow is Good Friday. That means fish. After the break, we'll take you to a restaurant that grills it up Beirut style. Stay with us. Whatever you may be doing for your Easter long weekend, you may have to plan ahead. Transit will be running throughout the weekend, but tomorrow's routes will operate on their Sunday schedules starting around 6 a.m. Tomorrow, Dundas will be closed between Bathurst and Ossington. That's to make way for the St. Francis of Assisi Church's annual Good Friday procession. The LCBO and beer stores will be closed on Friday and Sunday. Most shopping malls are also closed on those days, except the Eaton Centre with holiday hours. But places like the ROM, the Toronto Zoo, and Ripley's are open all weekend. For a more thorough list, head online to our website. That's at cbc.ca/Toronto. And if you're looking for a place to grab something other than fish and chips on Good Friday, this next place might work for you. A Scarborough spot known for its Beirut-style grilled fish.
Honestly, everything is good here. But what I eat mostly myself, I eat sea bass, sea bream, red snapper. My name is Ali Dubouk, owner of Gadir Fish Restaurant. We're located at Lawrence and Pharmacy. We have like fresh fish you could choose from, and you choose if you want it fried or grilled. We do our grilling on charcoal, natural charcoal. So once the customer chooses the fish, and if you choose it grilled, we take it to the kitchen, clean it, and then we marinate it with our spices, our own spices, and then we put it on the grill till it becomes ready, and we serve it to the customer. For the baba ganoush, we use only like fresh eggplant. Also, we do it on a charcoal because our experience tells us the taste is much different than if you use the can or if you barbecue it in the oven.
It looks great. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. We are back on Monday. Have a great long weekend and happy Easter.